good time, but let's take a look at where these players are going in drafts. Let's take a look at the average draft position, or what we'll refer to it from here on out as ADP. Okay, so for those of you who aren't hip with the acronyms, ADP, average draft position. And we're going to be talking about where these players are getting drafted in best ball drafts over on Underdog Fantasy and kind of how that relates to where they might go in fantasy drafts, and honestly, just who we see as some of the best values. Some players that are sleepers that are getting drafted in these mid to late rounds that can absolutely win the league for your team. So, JJ, why don't you kick us off here? I know you wanted to talk about a quarterback that I feel like we've all soured on for absolutely no reason, and I don't know why he's going so late in best ball drafts.
Yeah, man. Kyler Murray. And look, I think that within positional ranks, I understand that he's QB8 in most spots. And that's where, I have him personally on QB7. I think that he's a better pick right now than like a Burrow, depending on your stacking situation, of course, from a best ball standpoint. But I just think there's a lot of upside with Kyler right now. He's coming off that major injury last year. He played with a bad supporting cast, all the while on a points per game basis. He had nearly an identical fantasy points per game as like a Brock Purdy, who was obviously MVP candidate throughout most of the season, had an absurd touchdown rate. That has to do with the fact that Kyler still got it done with his legs to a decent degree. He's now finished with 5 or more rushing points per game. So that's just points via rushing, 5 or more in 4 of his 5 seasons. And in that other season, he was at 4.9. So he's basically been at that 5 mark in all 5 of his seasons played. 35 quarterbacks since 2011. We've had 35 quarterbacks since 2011 where the passer threw it 300 or more times. So he was basically the starter of their team. But he also had that 5+ rushing point per game output. So basically, again, they're starters, they're mobile, they're getting points with their legs. Of those 35, the lowest points per game output came from Josh Allen during his rookie season, where he scored 17.3 fantasy points per game. 31 of the 35 hit 18 points per game. That's a low-end QB1 season last year, if you want to frame it up that way. So to me, Kyler Murray being drafted at QB8, it's not necessarily his floor. His floor is probably like QB11 or so. But you look at, they add Marvin Harrison Jr. in the draft. Trey McBride has another year within that system. They add guys like Zay Jones. I mean, the supporting, Michael Wilson, another year in. The supporting cast is just far, far better this year than it was last year. And so I look at this landscape and there's a decent gap where you get to Murray. Murray's more so part of that like next tier of guys as opposed to like the Burrow tier of guys. And that's intriguing because I think that of these players that are sort of drafted, in that lower end QB1 range, he's the guy. I would even argue outside of like, once you get past like Anthony Richardson, he's the guy who probably has a top 3 outcome in his range of outcomes more so than the other guys. So I think that he's the target this year in that range. There's some late round guys that are interesting too, but you're getting that combination of passing and rushing with him that you really can't find elsewhere.
And there was so much excitement for Jonathon Gannon last year. And like we knew going into the year, like Kyler Murray coming off an ACL tear, we thought it was going to be Clayton Tune starting. And then they made this like last minute switch to Josh Dobbs. Like last year was very much so just a punt away season. But there still should be this excitement with Jonathon Gannon because now he's got the weapons. Now he's got a healthy Kyler Murray. I'm completely with you. Kyler Murray is one of my favorite targets right now. I've been drafting him nonstop in best ball. And when we were talking about dynasty stuff earlier in the offseason, Alfredo, you and I kept saying like, before the draft, go out and make moves for Kyler Murray because we know Marvin Harrison's going there. Like it was all but etched in stone. And we knew that as soon as he actually did get drafted there, he was going to jump in value. And we saw that immediately. So the window to buy him in Dynasty is probably closed, but the best ball and redraft markets haven't really caught up yet.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those things where fantasy football just becomes such a what have you done for me lately type of business, especially with people that are drafting even now. But I was going to say with people drafting later on in the year, I think Kyler Murray might end up staying where he is in most home league drafts. And you're probably going to be able to get him with a good discount. But JJ, you talk about him having that quarterback 3 ceiling in his bag of tricks. Like, yeah, absolutely. We saw him do that when DeAndre Hopkins was on the team. And now he just gets a younger, potentially even better version. I mean, you go and look at the years he's not hurt. He's quarterback 6, quarterback 3, quarterback 5 in points per game. I mean, he could do it. He could do it. And so even last year, coming off the injury with a bad team, quarterback 9. So it's almost like when you're drafting him at quarterback 8, you're kind of maybe getting him at his floor. I have to imagine it's hard to think that it could be worse than what it was last year.
Yeah, totally agree. And again, you can't really find, there aren't that many dual threat quarterbacks that you can just target and pinpoint late like it used to be, 5 or 6 years ago, because people have caught on. And so he's one of those guys. I know he's not late, but he's one of those guys where you at least have that dual threat ability.
Yeah, I mean, it's late enough, right? 7th round
Yeah.
right now. Maybe even in home leagues, it might be 8th round. If I'm able to get 7 other good skill players and then Kyler Murray, I feel really good about my team. You're basically putting out an entire starting lineup and then adding a guy with top 3 potential there. So I'm totally cool with that. Now, before we move on and get to our next player here, I just want to remind you guys there are tons of ways to enjoy our show. We've got our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/footballguysfantasy, where if you go and check that out, we've got all of our rankings episodes that we did last week. They are broken down into easy to watch, easy to follow along rankings and tiers for quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight ends. We've been doing a whole bunch of stuff there. Like Dave mentioned, the best ball live streams where you can see him doing these mock drafts live every Friday right now. Last week he had Pete Overzet, and it's a great way to just kind of see how ADP is changing as the weeks go on, how people adjust to this. And so if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you like this video, share it with your friends, leave a comment down below which sleepers you love from this, which ones maybe you hate, maybe you have your own sleepers you want to add. Let us know down below. And for the other option, those of you say, I don't want to watch stuff, I want to listen while I'm out doing things, we've got our podcast. You can go and check it out wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anything like that. Make sure you subscribe to the show. After you listen to the episode, leave us just an honest review. An honest review. Hopefully that honesty is 5 stars, but let us know what you liked about the show, maybe some guests you'd like to see, some topics you'd like to hear us talk about, and just leave your favorite parts of the show in that review. Okay. We'll have the link for the podcast in the comments down below. Now, we got all the business out of the way. Dave, you have another quarterback that you want to talk about as a sleeper who, I mean, he's like right there in the same vein as Kyler Murray and Anthony Richardson and all these other mobile quarterbacks.
Yeah, I want to talk about Jayden Daniels, and if you've watched this show, you're probably sick of hearing us talk about Jayden Daniels. We talked about him in Dynasty as like one of our favorite targets, taking him ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr., ahead of all the other wide receivers. And now in best ball, I think there's a caveat that comes with underdog ADP. Typically when you're drafting on underdog, you're looking at people that are swinging for like the high end range of outcomes. Like you're swinging for the fences on every single pick. That's why you see Devon Achane going in round 2 right now. And that's why we saw Trey Lance going in round 5 a couple of years ago. That's why we saw Anthony Richardson going in round 6 last year. I don't understand why the market hasn't really caught up with Jayden Daniels, because he's still going in round 9 or 10 right now in underdog in a tournament where you're competing against 600,000 plus people to try to win over $1 million. You'd think this is a guy that would be going a little bit higher. In my opinion, he's the easiest pick in drafts right now. And I think that we'll see him creep up a little bit as the offseason progresses. And JJ, I know you wanted to talk about Jayden Daniels, and I could have talked about Kyler Murray. These are my 2 favorite targets right now with where they're going in drafts. 1,134 rushing yards last year, led the NCAA in yards per carry. I don't think yards per carry is a really predictive stat, but it tells us that he can rush, and he did it well and effectively last year. What really jumps out to me, though, looking at PFF, they've got their Power 5 quarterbacks, 197 qualified last year. Jayden Daniels was first in offensive grade, first in rushing grade, and third in passing grade. So I think there's this misconception that all he can do is run the ball, when in reality, he's a very good passer as well. And I think a lot of the reason that we're seeing him get pushed down right now is because there's been the big push this offseason about pressure to sack ratio. JJ, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't see that as being something that's going to inhibit him from scoring points in 2024. I think that could potentially ruin his longevity. We might not see him starting 2-3 years from now if he can't fix that. But regardless, we could still be looking at a Justin Fields type of season where he's going out here scoring 25 plus points per game every single week. So I am very much so in on him. Drafted 2nd overall, landed in a great position with some really good skill players here. He's going to start week 1, and he is one of the few quarterbacks that can actually rush for 1,000 yards in his rookie season. So going a few picks after Kyler Murray, those are my 2 favorite picks. I'm looking for Kyler Murray. If I can't get him, I'm looking for Jayden Daniels. And I have quite a few builds where I've just drafted both of them, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you could use the same statistic that I used with Kyler with the five or more rushing points per game and sort of
Mhm.
apply it to Jayden Daniels. Someone else in Washington hit that mark as a rookie quarterback in RG3, and I think that's sort of the comp that we're hoping for from a production standpoint. Obviously, we want the longevity to be there and hopefully not a torn up knee like we saw with RG3. But yeah, I mean, the other thing too with Daniels is that Cliff Kingsbury is now offensive coordinator in Washington. Not only do we have Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, who hopefully we see a little bit more from Dotson this year, and then now Luke McCaffrey, who I think is a great slot player. And then they have
Right, you
tight
said
end
it.
piece now, and there are pieces there to be strong offensively. But Cliff Kingsbury, when he was coaching in Arizona, and this is something that we've seen from him throughout his entire coaching career, going back to college as well. He was relatively pass heavy. I'd say relatively maybe above average, we'd say, but he runs at a pretty fast pace. And that's going to really, really help this offense see enough volume. That's the thing that needs to be. And then we see that in Indianapolis as well with the Colts, where if you have a mobile quarterback and you're looking for like the pass catchers and those offenses and stuff, the worst combination is a mobile quarterback with a slower offense, because that mobile quarterback is going to already inherently take over and take some of those plays away just for himself. But if the offense is going at a little bit of a faster pace, there's going to be more plays run. That's going to help the rest of the offense in general. But it's also going to help a guy like Jayden Daniels, because the offense is likely going to be moving down the field a little bit quicker, and there's just more opportunity for fantasy points. So I am absolutely in on Jayden Daniels. I even think from a dynasty perspective, I did a study on how quarterbacks appreciate in value from year 1 to year 2. It is wild how little value they lose, even if they're terrible in year 1. I mean, you're looking at like Zach Wilson, Kenny Pickett, these guys who, Justin Fields, who were not good as passers at all during their rookie seasons, and they barely lost any value in the dynasty market from year 1 to year 2. So to me, you get a free year of Jayden Daniels if you're drafting him in rookie drafts too. So I'm all about Daniels this year in every format.
Yeah, and we talk about Cliff Kingsbury. That was the same guy who helped develop Kyler, and we saw
Yeah.
Kyler just immediately giving us top 10 production when he stepped onto the field as a rookie. So, I don't think we need to beat a dead horse here. We've talked about Jayden Daniels a lot this offseason. Really, really easy pick right now in any format, dynasty, best ball, or redraft.
Yeah, and that ADP average draft position is creeping up. Just 2 weeks ago, he was at quarterback 16.
Yep.
Now he's at quarterback 13. Would not be surprised if we continue to see that go up, and that might change. When someone gets into their home draft leagues and they get that cheat sheet that they sit down with, and all of a sudden Jayden Daniels is at quarterback 11, they're wondering why. I mean, all the reasons you guys just stated are going to be why. But Dave, something that you mentioned, and I kind of want to ask this to both of you. JJ, I'll start with you first. How does the strategy change, Dave? Because you mentioned the double tapping a quarterback. How would you change that strategy in a normal redraft league? Because typically, yeah, you do want to have the one quarterback, and you probably don't double tap like a Kyler and Jayden in a redraft league. How would that strategy change for you in a redraft league if you are aiming for someone like Jayden Daniels? Do you take like a Geno Smith or a Jared Goff late as like a last pick, or do you just not even worry about that on your roster, JJ?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your league's like. I would say in most home leagues, you probably don't even have to worry about a backup quarterback. But if the rosters are deep enough, it's okay to have that backup, and having it like if you're drafting and the draft is going down, and your league mates are drafting a second quarterback, into round 10 and 11 and stuff like that. Eventually, you'll want to adjust a little bit, because the waiver wire isn't going to be as ripe, with able and capable quarterbacks. So I think in those formats and in those situations, it's fine to get a backup like a, more of a pocket passer that probably doesn't have a QB1 ceiling, but a fine enough high end QB2 ceiling if the passing stuff goes their way, like a Goff or Geno or something like that. Obviously, if you can marry the two and somehow find a mobile quarterback that late too, like if you want to take a chance on Justin Fields getting a job sooner rather than later or something in Pittsburgh, maybe you want to go that route. But generally speaking, you can probably just draft the one in a managed league and be okay with it.
All right, let's get to our next sleeper that we have here on the list. And this one I think is not only a fan favorite of Dave and I, but I think it's a fan favorite of the staffers at Football Guys. This is a player who keeps coming up in all of our group chats and players we're trading for in Dynasty. And I think he could end up being a really big value for someone in redraft and in best ball as well. So JJ, talk to us about Dontayvion Wicks, the wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, I just find it kind of strange that he's sort of the afterthought of this wide receiver group. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that if you look at last year, when Christian Watson played, Watson was the one seeing the highest target share in the offense. But it was still only like 18-19%. It wasn't that fantastic. And yeah, I mean, like you could, in a managed league, I think Green Bay wide receivers could very much be a headache to some degree, right? You have four very capable guys after they crushed the draft last year. They hit on Jayden Reed. They hit on Dontayvion Wicks. You have two very capable pass catching tight ends in that offense. You add Marshawn Lloyd to the backfield and Josh Jacobs, obviously. So like this offense has a lot of parts that can command decent target shares. And so I'm looking at this as all right, so if we're going to throw some darts at this offense, which I think we should in best ball, especially where, you just want some pieces to it and you want these spiked weeks, which is going to happen probably for each of these guys to some degree. Not only is Wicks the most attractive because he's so cheap, but he had a really freaking good rookie season that people just seem to not care about that much. When I'm shocked that he's not getting more love. I think a lot of it is because he was a day 3 afterthought, during the draft. But last season, he ran over 200 routes in that offense, and he had a yards per route run rate above 2, which is not a normal thing to happen for a rookie wide receiver. That's happened only 26 times over the since 2011. That's basically 2 times per season from a rookie wide receiver. Now, last year it happened with 5 rookies. We had Puka Nacua, Jayden Reed, Dontayvion Wicks, Tank Dell, Rashee Rice. Those were the 5 who ran 200 or more routes, had a yards per route run rate above 2. So if you look at the 21 wide receivers that have next season data who hit those marks as rookies, the following season, their sophomore season in the league, all of them played at least 7 games. And then 18 of those 21 wide receivers hit double-digit PPR points per game in year 2. 13 of the 21 hit 14 or more PPR points per game, which is a low-end, mid-range wide receiver 2 type season. So, those guys, if you look at that list, it's filled with like Jamar Chase and Odell Beckham and all these very, very good prospects and very, very good players. I would say, yeah, Dontayvion Wicks isn't necessarily that, but that's also the point too. Like, he's grouped with very, very good wide receivers here who had very good and efficient rookie campaigns. You're not paying for this. I mean, Dontayvion Wicks goes very, very late in a lot of these best ball drafts. I think he's a smash. Even if you don't get a Packer stack or have Jordan Love, you can annoy the guy who drafted, or the person who drafted Jordan Love, and get Dontayvion Wicks on your team still, because I think there's going to be spiked weeks. And what if he has undeniable talent? Like, what if he's just a better player than Romeo Doubs, which I don't think is that crazy of a question to ask and to say that he might be, because Romeo Doubs has not had the same type of efficiency that Dontayvion Wicks showed in year 1. So I'm very, very into Wicks right now as a later round target.
So I love Wicks, and maybe I'm just getting too deep in the wormhole here. Maybe I've done too many drafts, and I'm just trying to talk myself into this. But can you apply a lot about what you said about Dontayvion Wicks? Are you willing to draft Bo Melton in round 18? I mean, we saw him in a very small sample last year, just 5 games, but targets per route run, only Tyreek Hill had more. Yards per route run, Tyreek Hill, Nico Collins, and Brandon Ayuk only had more. Like I said, we saw it in a very, very small sample, but you talk about ambiguity in team situations all the time, and there's a lot of ambiguity in this Packers room. Dontayvion Wicks is also my favorite target, but if I miss out on him and I'm looking to get in on this Packers offense, do you think it's just, lighting a pick on fire, taking Bo Melton at the end of your drafts?
I mean, I think any 18th round pick is almost lighting a pick on fire for the most part. So I would never
last year.
Yeah, right. I would never fight anyone for going like the Melton route. I think the difference though is that Wicks doing it as a rookie, as a
Right.
first year guy, is just incredibly impressive, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the main point. And not only that, but he ran more routes. He was a little bit more involved and such. But yeah, I mean, I think that it does show us too, because Jayden Reed's on this list too, of these guys who ran a
Mhm.
lot of routes, were really efficient per route run. It does show us that this Packers offense too is just a good place to be. And it does make me question Romeo Doubs a tad. Like, I think the only reason why Romeo Doubs is getting the love that he's getting is because he was a red zone threat and he scored a decent number of touchdowns. And then he had the playoff bump where he performed well in the playoffs. And so if you looked at his dynasty value after the playoffs last year, he was his wide receiver rank was like 20 spots ahead of Dontayvion Wicks, despite the fact that Wicks was more efficient per route run. He was a rookie, which I feel like is just like getting lost in the shuffle here, is that Wicks was doing that as a first year afterthought, as a day 3 guy. My model certainly did not like Dontayvion Wicks. I don't think a lot of people who were watching film were like, yeah, you got to get Dontayvion. I know people are going to be out there and someone's going to be screaming in the comments saying, oh, I love Dontayvion Wicks. But like, it wasn't like he was this guy that people were like super, super into. I think that's just playing into what the market is doing right now. He should be drafted, I think, a couple rounds higher than he's being drafted.
I just want to invest in this Packers offense.
Yeah,
I don't know who it's going to be, but it's just going to be a good offense.
for sure.
There's been something that I've been tracking throughout this offseason, and it comes from a really smart mind in the industry, Ryan Heath, who works over at Fantasy Points. Everyone should go follow him at Ryan J _Heath. And he's been tracking one of the best predictive stats from one year to the next in fantasy. And one of the stats that he found was being first downs per route run and first down rate. And looking at the chart that he has here, and from one year to the next, it predicted guys like Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk, players like that. You go and look, Dontayvion Wicks is number 13 on this list, surrounded by guys like Rashee Rice, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Jamar Chase, like very good players. And then you even take a look at the sample size, it's nearly identical, which, by the way, the first down per route run rate is identical to Tank Dell, who only ran about 40 more routes. And you start to look at Tank Dell, second year player, good offense, good quarterback, maybe crowded wide receiver room. There's a lot of similarities. And I'm not saying like, don't draft Tank Dell and wait and draft Dontayvion Wicks later, but I think it's worth it. And what we're doing right here is having this conversation that Dontayvion Wicks could be a lot better than people are valuing him. And I mean, right now we're able to get him in 12th round in best ball, probably 13th or 14th round in redraft home leagues when those drafts start to come around. So it's maybe not burning a pick, but it's one of those last or late round picks that could really set you up.
And how wild that we just spent like 5 minutes talking about the Packers receiver room and didn't even mention Christian Watson. I mean, how far this guy has fallen.
He's still in my heart.
Yeah, and I think people are still drafting him. I mean, he's still getting drafted pretty highly in drafts, and I can't stomach it right now. I would much prefer to throw the late round darts on some of these other guys.
Now, before we move on here, I just want to remind everybody, you can go back and check out the rankings episodes that we did where we went deep. We went 24 quarterbacks, 38 running backs, 48 receivers, only 12 tight ends because we don't really care that much about tight ends. But go back and check out those episodes where we have these lovely tiers in our videos that you can follow along. On the podcast version, it's broken down into 2 episodes so you can get through those a little bit quicker. But those are great to go back and check that out. And we're going to be updating those as the whole off season goes on. Now, Dave, you have a guy that we talked about extensively in those ranking episodes. It's a running back who, I mean, there's kind of 2 sides of the spectrum here. He's either Rachaad White and gets some great opportunity, or he's Alexander Mattison and the opportunity doesn't quite matter. I think you and I both lean more towards this player being talented and being a great value in drafts. So talk to us about Zamir White, the running back for the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, like this was my guy last year, like the late round guy that I was saying to go out and draft everywhere, and he got pushed up a little bit. I don't know if he really qualifies as like a deep, deep sleeper. He's going in about round 8 right now, but I think a lot of people get scared off because it's kind of that running back dead zone, and they think, this is a guy that we're just projecting volume to that isn't going to be that efficient. But I think that's just a bad process because I think that he is an efficient running back. Like we saw this guy in Georgia out touching James Cook, and it took some time because he was buried behind Josh Jacobs on the depth chart. But what we saw last year when he finally did get his opportunity over the final 4 weeks of the season, 24.3 opportunities per game and 114.3 scrimmage yards per game. I mean, that's wildly impressive to see any running back do that. It just took a little while for him to kind of break out, but we're seeing that more and more now, where it kind of takes until year 2 for a lot of these running backs to get their opportunity. I just don't see him as a dead zone running back like a lot of people are saying. He's got the day 3 tag, which people are scared off by, but he was a 17th pick of day 3. I mean, this guy was just half a round away from getting the day 2 draft capital that we wanted. I just think he's a good running back. Little competition for touches right now. We talked about Alexander Mattison, who really blew his opportunity last year. I don't see him as much of a threat. Dylan Lobby and Amir Abdullah, they're going to get some passing down work, but I think Zamir White is going to get most of his opportunities on the ground, which does cap his ceiling a little bit, but we can project a lot of workload his way. We're talking about a guy with 96 percentile speed. He's got the size to be a 3-down back, and I think this Las Vegas offense could be a little bit better than people expect. Last year, we were looking at Aiden O'Connell. This year, I think there's a huge upgrade making the move to Gardner Minshew. They've got Brock Bowers as well, who's going to open things up in the running game. So I'm in on this Raiders offense, and right now, Zamir White is a guy not getting drafted super late in drafts, but you can get him in round 8 as your RB3, and I'm very much so in at that price.
Yeah, I would say, from a projection standpoint with White, it's there, right? Like you look at projection to ranking, and White comes out looking like a value because his projection looks better than where he's generally being drafted. I'd say the downside to that is that there's less contingent upside with him as there would be with more of a part-time guy who's in the backfield where, I always like attacking those ambiguous backfields where, a guy can just naturally win out, number one, or, obviously his teammate can get hurt. And then you can have those like really, really monster weeks. And I think I don't agree. I don't disagree with you at all that Zamir White is a player to target or anything like that. Like I've gotten him plenty. I'm just giving you the more of the con side. Like the part that I'm afraid of with White is the pass catching side where,
Ah,
they get Dylan Laube. I don't know if Laube's going to just immediately take over and be the pass catcher there. I mean, it could just be Amir Abdullah and they just like
mhm.
go that route and use that kind of body there. I mean, you look at White down the stretch in the final month, his target share per game rate was in that like 9 to 10% range. And that was, with a little bit less competition overall in that backfield. And so I do worry about the pass catching a little bit. And that's a piece that I'm always really, really sometimes foolishly attracted to, with more of the middle round backs and stuff. The way I kind of look at White is if you buy into the Raiders offense and if you think that there's going to be an upgrade overall within the offense, which I think there should be, but if you're going to really buy into it, it sounds like Kluge, you're definitely liking them a decent bit more with Gardner Minshew, under center, which you should. It's almost like he's a discount or like an arbitrage Isaiah Pacheco in a way. But,
Yeah,
obviously Pacheco being in Kansas City, I think Pacheco's a great pick right now. So don't take that the wrong way. But very similar backfield shares more than likely. They're probably going to see in that 75, maybe 80% running back rush share range, all while maybe getting to the double digit target share range. But I doubt it.
probably more
More
two,
so
three
for White
targets
a
a
little bit
game
more.
is what
But
we're looking at.
what's that?
We're probably looking at like 2 to 3 targets a game. Like we're not
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
at
yeah,
huge.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think he's a safe enough player that I'm not really worried about his projectable output that much. I just don't know if we're going to see him, become like a top 5 running back in fantasy, which, there's only going to be like 1 or 2 of those from the middle rounds anyway. So I think he's a pretty safe bet right now.
And I think we're kind of talking out of both sides of our mouth here because we're using underdog ADP, but we're talking more redraft sleepers.
Yeah.
So Zamir White isn't a guy that I'm aggressively targeting in best ball. Like I said, where you're kind of swinging for that high end range of outcomes.
Yep.
There, I'm more prone to wait till the later rounds where I can get the guys that have the contingent upside. But in your home leagues, when you're drafting Zamir White, if he's still falling into that, round 8, round 9 range, I think he's just a guy that you can lean on as a plug and play RB2 or flex, even if it's going to be with a little bit of a lower weekly ceiling.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to be so intrigued to see where Zamir White starts going in redraft leagues because you are going to have a lot of people who are just like, who's Zamir White? And then
Mhm.
you're going to have the managers that had him last year be like, this dude saved my season. I'm taking him in the 3rd round. So I think that's going to be really intriguing to watch. And JJ, as you were talking, this reminded me so much of the way you viewed Josh Jacobs last year, where you're like, I'm fine with him. He's probably going to be in that RB 12 to 15 range. That's fine because of the volume. I mean, it seems like you feel similarly to Zamir White. Do you like this a little bit better because the value's better? You can draft him later. Does that, how much does that play into it for you?
Yeah, look, if the opportunity cost stays the way that it is right now, like if, obviously on underdog, you're going to get more wide receiver heavy drafts. And what that means that in your redraft league, these running backs can be pushed up a little bit more versus where they're being drafted right now. But if we were to assume that the same cost is going to be there in redraft, yeah, you take it all day long from a value perspective. I would say though, with Jacobs last year, you could at least see the path to like him seeing a lot of volume through the air. I think that that's still a question because if you go back to college, Zamir White's never really been a pass catcher. Like that's never been part of his arsenal. Of course, last year you saw some dump offs. Like he would see a game every once in a while, like down the stretch over that last month where he had like an 11, 12% target share. We just know factually that it's unlikely that we're going to see a spike target share season from Zamir White. And I think that their draft pick of Dylan Laube, who
Right.
is one of the best pass catchers in this class, I think it shows us that they're thinking about this as a well-rounded backfield, and understandably so. Like that's how you should be team building. And so that would be my biggest concern with White is just what it's going to look like from a pass catching perspective.
What's funny is that as you were saying that, I just remembered, oh yeah, Tom Telesco is the GM for the Raiders. He's the same one that set up the Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler 1-2 punch in what was San Diego at the time. And I'm not saying Dylan Laube is going to be Austin Eckler, but I'm saying like there's a possibility that we see those kind of roles and people get pigeonholed into something. So it's kind of good to see both sides of this coin here.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next guy on here that, I mean, he surprised a lot of people throughout the season last year. And he's another one who, I mean, good pass catcher, really good running back from everything I've seen on film. There's potential here for opportunity in what's really becoming an ambiguous situation in a backfield. JJ, talk to us about Jaleel McLaughlin, the running back for the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, man, bring on those ambiguous backfields. I'm all about the uncertainty because uncertainty brings down cost, and we want to get values out of our draft picks. So, obviously, when we look at last year, it's not an apples to apples comparison when even looking at the same backfield, when looking at Javonte Williams versus Samaje Perine versus Jaleel McLaughlin, because they all played very different roles within that offense. But with that being said, he beat both Perine and Javonte Williams in expected points added per carry, success rate, rushing yards over expected per carry, 10 plus yard run rate, 20 plus yard run rate, PFF rush grade, PFF receiving grade, PFF pass blocking grade, and he was better than Williams in yards per route run. That's Jaleel McLaughlin as a rookie, undrafted rookie, coming out of nowhere, outperforming, obviously Javonte Williams has not been the same since his injury, but outperforming a good prospect in Williams and a guy that's been around the league and been a very solid contributor throughout in Samaje Perine. I think that naturally from year 1 to year 2, he can naturally grow into this role a little bit more. And I specifically, as you mentioned, Alfredo, I think that he's got a chance to just grow as a receiver in the offense. I was doing some research on McLaughlin last week, and I came across one of the most mind-blowing statistics that I found in probably like 3 or 4 months. But I love looking at team target shares, team backfield shares, stuff like that, as opposed to just looking at the individual position or the individual player, right? So I'll look at like running back target shares by team as opposed to the individual running back target share. And I like doing that because I like to see how coaches and teams sort of utilize these positions and if there's any consistency from year over year. So since 2011, I looked at the top 20 running back target share seasons by team, and I just listed them out, the top 20. Sean Payton's teams own 8 of the top 20 in team running back target share since 2011. Last season, the Broncos had a 32% target share to their running backs, which is by far the highest in the league. You look at their team right now, you have Cortland Sutton as the only stable piece there. Marvin Mims had a really disappointing rookie season. Troy Franklin falls in the draft. Who knows what that's going to look like? Greg Dulcich can't stay healthy. You bring it all together, they're probably going to have a pretty high target share again to these running backs. I think that Jaleel McLaughlin right now, from a projection standpoint, he's basically being drafted at his projection, right? But there's this contingent upside of what if he gets more usage in the offense, or what if Javonte Williams goes down, or what if Samaje Perine goes down? People are going to look at the Audric Estime draft pick and say, oh, they got Estime. This is bad news for everyone in that backfield. To me, the Estime pick, number one, Estime is not much of a pass catcher at all. Like he didn't play that role in college. He's more of a bigger bodied, early down bruiser. Sean Payton even said that in a post-draft press conference that that's what Estime's role is. He's more of a Javonte Williams replacement as opposed to a Jaleel McLaughlin replacement. So I'm very into McLaughlin. Like, is he going to be a top 10 running back in fantasy? No, I don't think that's a really smart bet to make, but you're getting him past RB 50. And he's someone who's going to get work in his offense. He's going to get pass catching work. He can definitely have those spiked weeks. And, the pass catching side, especially in a redraft managed league, is really nice because you're going to have, especially in, PPR, even half PPR formats, you're going to have a projectable floor every week where if you do go 0 RB or hero RB or something, you have this RB2, this bucket of RB2s, if you will, with McLaughlin being part of that you can plug in, get some fantasy points, and then know that the upside is there if things really click for him or if someone gets injured. And so to me, he's like one of the perfect 0 RB type targets this season. Second year players are another grouping of players that I like to target because they break out at a higher rate than other groups do. So I think Jaleel McLaughlin just has a lot working in his favor.
JJ, you got my wheels spinning as you were talking, so I don't know if you could see my eyes darting around. I decided to pull some stuff up here. PFF, they break it up into behind the line of scrimmage, short, intermediate, and deep throws. Guess who had the best adjusted completion percentage on behind the line of scrimmage throws last year in
I'm going
college?
to guess it's Jaleel McLaughlin.
Well, passing, it
Oh,
was Bo
passing. I thought you
Nix.
meant receiving
Oh,
backs.
yeah.
No, no. Bo Nix was
Bo
the
Nix,
most
yeah.
accurate
Okay.
behind the line of scrimmage, the most accurate on short throws, and the most accurate on intermediate throws. We know he struggles with the deep ball, but this is exactly what Bo Nix, like they're basically priming him to be Drew Brees. Like, it's weird. Like, they drafted a guy who has the same skill set as a 42-year-old Drew Brees had, and it looks like that's the same exact offense they want to run.
Yeah.
We're not going to see him airing it out deep, but I think they drafted a guy who can do exactly what Russ Wilson couldn't do. Just kind of run these timing routes, hit the receivers or the running backs when they get out in space. That's what he does best. So I think it just makes so much sense to be in on Jaleel McLaughlin for that pass catching upside.
Yeah, I mean, like, go back to the Saints offenses of years past. And by the way, the Bo Nix stuff, according to Broncos social media, he's a great deep ball passer as well. Don't forget about that piece.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Said he was
but
locked in if we're
yeah,
gonna believe
yeah,
Broncos
yeah.
social media.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised though if McLaughlin has like a really good like passer rating or something on short, on catches behind the line as well. But regardless, people like think back to the Sean Payton backfields in New Orleans. We had multiple players in those backfields as fantasy worthy assets for years. I mean, like you had Pierre like why couldn't
Reggie
McLaughlin be
Bush.
a Pierre Thomas type? And to me, like if you want to talk arbitrage, which I always try to like think about players that are being drafted earlier who I could then get that archetype late. I think Jaleel McLaughlin is kind of just a cheaper version of Jalen Warren at the end of the day. Like why can't he play? Obviously, there's, I have Jalen Warren ranked ahead. I like Jalen Warren more, but that's the kind of role that I could see sort of formulate with Jaleel McLaughlin.
So I'm sort of, I don't want to say developing a crush, but I am starting to see a lot of value in a guy like Javonte Williams, and it almost feels like everyone else is sort of staying away from him. And a lot of it for me is the ambiguity of the backfield, the target share stuff, like you mentioned, JJ. Dave, we talked about this when we did the running back rankings. Is I love the fact that Bo Nix had the third lowest depth of target in college football. That 30% of his passes were behind the line of scrimmage. He's a big check down guy. So while I love this value with Jaleel McLaughlin, JJ, do you see a good ceiling for a guy like Javonte Williams if he's healthy, or is this kind of a thing where we're saying, you know what, let's just stay away because there are so many other backs here and we really don't know what Sean Payton's going to do?
I probably, if we're talking like volume of best ball drafts or something like that, I probably want to just be at market with, just
Mhm.
be totally fine, not overweight or underweight with Williams, just because like I really liked Williams as a prospect. I thought that he was extremely good, and if things turn around for him from that after that injury, then I want a piece of that because he's in a position right now where he could really thrive and do well. And even last year, I mean, like people don't fully realize this, but he actually had a pretty good receiving role in that offense. It's part of the reason why that backfield had so many targets going their way is because Javonte Williams was getting some cheap ones, especially like late in games and checkdowns and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, like I don't mind Williams. It's just more so I think McLaughlin is the more of the screaming value just because of where he's being drafted right now. I don't, from a projection standpoint, Javonte Williams is a better projection than Jaleel McLaughlin. But would I be
Yeah, of
shocked
course.
from a range of outcomes standpoint if McLaughlin outscores Javonte Williams this year? If things sort of break his way from a receiving standpoint, he kind of plays like a Darren Sproles type role in this Peyton offense. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened at the end of the day. I mean, especially because I do think that if there's a player that Audric Estime is going to dig into, if he does indeed see any touches in year one, it's more Javonte Williams than a guy like Jaleel McLaughlin.
Yeah, you got my wheels spinning a lot, man. I'm looking more into this. I like Jaleel McLaughlin last year, but I kind of chalked it up as a flash in the pan. But I'm buying what you're selling, and I did look it up on running backs behind the line of scrimmage. Jaleel McLaughlin had the third best receiving grade behind only Tajay Spears and Bijan
Yeah, there you go.
Robinson, and
Yeah.
he averaged over 10 yards after catch per reception on balls that he caught behind the line of scrimmage. That's just bonkers.
Yeah, I just think it's one of those things where it's just like I think he's just good. And if
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
like if he were like he didn't even get invited to the combine last
Mhm.
year. Like he's not even in my prospect database because he wasn't drafted, didn't go to the combine. I didn't know anything about the dude until the season started going. And then after the season, I'm looking at the numbers. I'm like, this dude was unreal last year, like very, very good. And Sean Payton is the arrogant coach that we need to get an undrafted guy a lot of touches. This is the coach that we need for him.
And shout out, Cecil Lammy, who wouldn't stop talking about Jaleel McLaughlin last offseason. And I think everybody was like, who is this? Like, people didn't
Yeah.
know who Jaleel McLaughlin was. And Cecil would come out of every single training camp practice just saying, let's get Jaleel McLaughlin. He's going to do something. And everyone was like, sure, he is, Cecil. And he did.
Yeah.
The guy who, by the way, last thing on this Broncos backfield, the guy who I think ends up getting lost in a lot of this, Samaje Perine might not even be there. The
Mhm.
Broncos, who are strapped for cash, they save
Yeah.
$3 million if they cut him. So
Yeah.
they've got a whole bunch of other guys. All right, let's move on here. That was way too much Broncos running back talk. Let's talk about something a little bit sexier. Dave, the RB1 unequivocal in this rookie class, Jonathon Brooks for the Carolina Panthers. We recently had this quote from Dave Canales, who just he's not mincing words. He just wants to establish the run. He sees their offense as a running team. He wants his starting running back to catch passes. They want to make things easier for Bryce Young. I'm sorry if I'm stealing all of your talking points. Take it away, Dave Kluge.
Well, again, I'm not talking about like super late guys here. I'm talking about guys that I expect to rise throughout the
Yep.
offseason. And Jonathon Brooks is a guy right now getting drafted as the RB25. He's going even after who I just talked about a little bit earlier in Zamir White. And I think Jonathon Brooks has a much higher ceiling than Zamir White if everything breaks right for him. Um, Realistically, I think he should be going in round 3 or 4. And I think the concerns about his ACL tear are why he's getting pushed down. But we know how this goes with guys coming off of an injury. All it's going to take is one camp clip. We're going to see him cut around a cone in shorts and no pads, and everybody's going to get excited, and he's going to shoot 3 rounds up in ADP. So I'm trying to get him now while I still can. Like you said, clear cut RB1 of this class, despite coming off an ACL tear last year. Um, like you said, Dave Canales wants to establish the run here, run the snot out of the ball, all those fun things to say. And Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard were just flat out terrible last year. So that's why they invested this draft capital in Jonathon Brooks. Again, kind of looking at how he was last year, we don't have a full sample size because of the injury, but out of 48 qualifying Power 5 college running backs last year, looking at 135 plus carries as the threshold, Brooks was graded as PFF's not only best rusher, but also their best receiver. Logged a breakaway run on 43.3% of his rushes. Like that's crazy to think about. Like 2 out of 5 times he was touching the ball, he was ripping off 15 plus yards. He was second in yards per route run behind only Travion Henderson, who's probably going to be next year's RB1. This guy is just oozing with talent. But what I like best about him, JJ, I know we talked about this. I don't know if you remember, like years ago, I ran a Twitter poll about like, would you rather have a guy who gives you 15 points per game for a whole season or gives you 25 points per game for
Yeah.
half the season? And the big deciding factor in that was, well, is that production coming late in the year? Because we know late season production matters so much more. So when I'm drafting Jonathon Brooks, I don't care if he doesn't play the first 8 weeks. I'm not drafting him for a full season's workload. I'm drafting him to be that late season hammer where he can give you 20, 25 points per game down the stretch when those games matter most. So whether it's in your home league, if you want to just draft him and stash him on IR, or if you're drafting in best ball right now and you need somebody that's going to help give you that push in the finals, Jonathon Brooks is my favorite running back to draft.
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree more about Jonathon Brooks. It's so weird to me that people are walking away from this draft and they're saying this draft didn't give us any bell cow backs. Like we don't have these like given the draft capital, like because Jonathon Brooks, we didn't know for sure he would go in round 2 entering the draft, just given sentiment and given where like some of these mock draft aggregators had him. I think that if he didn't tear his ACL, he might have gone like late round 1 into day 2. But that ACL was a really big question mark. And if it was a really big question mark for a team, it should be a really big question mark for us as fantasy managers. But then he goes round 2 to a situation that I think people look at and they're like, Chuba Hubbard's there, Miles Sanders is there. Like Dave said, not really. I mean, it's a very climbable depth chart at the end of the day. Jonathon Brooks in my prospect models scored a 94, which to anyone listening that might not make any, sounds completely arbitrary. To give you an idea, he basically had the same score as Kenneth Walker did. And when Kenneth Walker came out, people were all about it, right? Because obviously they had Rashad Penny back there too, but people were all about Kenneth Walker. In rookie drafts, he was a very firm mid first round pick, often going like 105, 106. Jonathon Brooks, I know that it's a little bit of a deeper class, but he'll fall into like the beginning of round 2 in Superflex rookie drafts right now. And it's bonkers to me because he's a legit bell cow back in this class. I think the idea of this class is that it's a bad class. There's not that good running back talent. Brooks is an elite talent out of this class. The only reason he didn't look even better in my model is because he played behind Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson in college, right? If he would have, he does get a little bit of a bump forward because of teammate score, but I mean, hypothetically, he could have been an even better prospect overall. And I like the landing spot too. Dave Canales is coming off a season as offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay, where he gave Rashad White one of the best workloads in all of football. And all they're saying out of Carolina is they want to run the ball. They want to get the running backs involved. Jonathon Brooks, to me, at the very least to start the year, he's immediately the best pass catcher in that backfield. And so they can use him in that role. And you can have, maybe they don't want to give him like a ton of goal line touches or some of those like looks that where he might not be able to sustain the hits or what have you with his knee. But to me, he's going to play a receiving role at the very least to start. And then that could easily grow into bell cow role. And then like Kluge said, it's like a second half of the season during the fantasy playoffs, during the most important part of the year, he could just be a full blown bell cow back. And what if that Carolina offense takes a step forward? He could be a monster.
Yeah, and then with ACL tears, they're tricky, but I'm not a doctor, but I've talked to a lot of guys who study this, and the two things that bode well for recovery are youth and athleticism. Jonathon Brooks has both of those on his side, so we should be looking. All indications are that it was a clean tear, which we like to hear. That he's already back to running, so I think we see him back sooner rather than later. Like I said, we just need that camp clip. That's what's going to happen. Is we're going to see that camp clip. He's going to shoot up in value, but right now you can still get him at a huge discount.
Youth and athleticism. Not us anymore, pal. Not
No,
us
no,
anymore.
sir.
What stands out to me the most is JJ, we talked about Jonathon Brooks earlier on in the offseason when, went on for late round perspectives, and he was my RB1. And I think what stands out so much to me here is the draft capital for a guy who really only had one productive season,
Mhm.
who had an injury, and this team traded up to go get him. And even with all of these things kind of holding him back, weighing him down, he was still nearly a first round pick going at 46 overall. So to have that kind of draft capital, I think it says everything we need to know about how the Panthers view Jonathon Brooks and how talented he is. That to basically have one season and an ACL injury. And it's like, yeah, he still almost went round one. I think a lot of us are underselling how good this guy really, really is.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
All right, let's get to the last sleeper that we have here on this list. And this one, we're going deep into the archives. This is a name I've been hearing a lot. A guy who he's kind of a developmental pick, and this is someone who I think has the goods to be a running back at the next level, but there is still a little bit of a transition. So, JJ, talk to us about Tyrone Tracy, running back for the New York Giants.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, when I was doing the prospect profiles in the pre-draft version of the prospect guide, I got to Tyrone Tracy. He was actually like the last guy that I was profiling. And I started looking at it at his profile overall. I was like, man, this is a really interesting, like just a like it's different, right? And if you have a late round pick or a guy who's sort of like an afterthought, who's got an interesting enough profile, that's someone that I'm probably going to be interested in to some degree. The downside to his analytical profile is he played 4 years as a wide receiver and then 2 years. I mean, he played 6 years of college ball. Let's just he's not young, right? He's not quite as old as we are, but he's 24 years old, and that's something that we don't often see hit out of a running back entering the league. Now, with that being said, there's some extra things going on with this year's class where you had the COVID season. There's new transfer rules, stuff like that, where we shouldn't be shocked when there's like Ray Davis is older as well. There's other guys who are over that 24-year-old mark. But the thing that's interesting with Tracy, I remember going through his profile and writing it up, and his top comp, and this is all objective analytical, his top comp was Tony Pollard. And I'm like, well, this is kind of strange because you get a guy who, no one's really talking about at this point. This is back in like late January and into February, and he's comping to a very successful running back in the NFL. And then you dig in more and you're like, oh, he played wide receiver, Tony Pollard. He was a hybrid in college at Memphis. And there really is like a decent connection between the two players. And, the thing that I'm intrigued by, Pollard was younger, so he looked a little bit better, analytically and such. But the thing that I like about the landing spot is, what does Tyrone Tracy do well? Well, he's a fairly explosive back. He had 104 speed score at the combine. That's weight adjusted 40 time. And you look at what the Giants have right now. They have Devin Singletary, solid back, but not overly explosive. They have Eric Gray, really good production profile coming out. Didn't do anything as a rookie. He was a decent enough prospect, like kind of intriguing, but again, not explosive. He had a really poor speed score. Singletary's was 86. Eric Gray's was 87. Anything under 90 is definitely somewhat of a red flag. It's something you should be a little bit concerned about. Tyrone Tracy had a speed score of 104. That comp to Tony Pollard is really intriguing. So the way I see it with Tracy is he's going to enter this backfield. There's not a lot for him to climb to be the RB2 at least. And then if he shows off that explosion, then they might want to just get him a little bit more touches. I mean, this is not unlike what we saw with Tony Pollard entering the league. The difference that Tony Pollard was playing behind a superstar running back whenever he entered the league. We're not in that situation with Tyrone. I mean, I don't mind Devin Singletary, but no one would call him a superstar running back, right? So I think it's a climbable depth chart, and I think the tools are there. He has the pass catching chops because he was a wide receiver. I just think he's a really intriguing prospect overall.
I like Tyrone Tracy, the prospect. I hate Brian Dable's infatuation with Devin
Yeah,
Singletary.
he does love that.
So I'm still willing to throw darts on Tyrone Tracy, but man, it's just going to disgust me when Devin Singletary ends up with an 80% weighted opportunity
Yeah.
share in this backfield.
Yeah.
But that's the thing is like this guy's not getting drafted somewhere where you're gonna say, "Oh, I really regret
Yeah.
that pick."
Exactly.
It's
Oh, he's an
15th
18th
round
rounder
best
right now.
ball.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
kind of shocked that he's going as late as he is, because at the very least you would think that gamers are like, "Oh, there's an opportunity at least in that backfield." Like it's Devin Singletary. Like no one before last year was ever thinking that about Devin Singletary. And even last year, he didn't become like a bell cow per se throughout the entire season. I mean, it took some time, and then they'd flip flop and give Dameon Pierce a little bit more work at times. And so like, I'm just shocked by just strictly like, forget about the infatuation of that Dable has with Singletary. Forget about the fact that Tyrone Tracy is an older prospect who doesn't have that much experience at running back. I think just the opportunity itself is shocking that people aren't in on him at least a couple rounds higher than where he's going right now.
Yeah, he's going to be a fun last round pick for people in redraft. And
Yeah.
honestly, we could see it. It's just all it is it takes one injury to a player. We never wish for that or hope for that, but all it takes is one ankle tweak or something like that for Devin Singletary, and all of a sudden Tyrone Tracy becomes the hot guy to get off the waiver wire in week 1 or 2. Well, this was great. This was great. We went through 7 different sleepers, touched on some other players that we wanted to talk about as well. JJ, you are awesome, man. One more time, please plug for everybody where they can get all your stuff and all the new projects that you have releasing soon.
Yeah, just check it all out, lateround.com. You'll see my ugly mug when you hit the site, and then you can just navigate through the top. I got the guides, got the podcast, all that good stuff.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Next week, we're going to be doing rankings, risers, and fallers with Julia Papworth from the Fantasy Footballers. So be sure to tune in for that. And be sure to subscribe to the daily news updates here from Football Guys, where you're going to get everything that you need to win your fantasy football leagues, whether it's best ball, redraft, dynasty, all of it. We just keep you up to date with all the news that's sent straight to your email inbox every day from Joe Bryant himself. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening all the way through. We'll catch you next time. Adios.